And we are live. Hello, everybody. This is Ted, and I'm here with James as usual. Say hi, James.
Hello again, everyone.
And Rapture Remembered, our eminence grise of the show.
Hello.
Wow, you sound so. So I just got. I should say I just got a new set of headphones. My old ones were kind of breaking down, and they sounded like I was listening to whoever I was talking to through like a tin can with a string through the bottom. And you guys both sound great, but especially you, Rapture. Just give me a little test sentence.
Hi, how is everyone doing this evening?
Oh my goodness. I feel like I can almost feel your warm breath on my cheek as you talk.
Okay, now the whole audience is upset at this point.
And we have a special guest with us tonight, Felipe Gusto. Felipe, are you with us?
Hello, good night, everyone. Boa noite in Portuguese.
And boa noite in Portuguese, and Portuguese because our guest is our foreign correspondent from Brazil. As the title suggests, he's here to give us an insider's perspective on what's going on down there. First, I guess, Felipe, if we could just dive right in. Tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, you've lived in Brazil your whole life, I suppose.
Yeah, my name is Felipe, as you already introduced. I'm 35 years old. I live in Brasilia, which is the capital of Brazil, and I have something interesting to say about the name of the capital. I have always lived here in Brasilia, and currently I work for the federal government, and we're probably going to talk about that later. And okay. I hope I can answer most of the questions you have about Brazil and what is going on now.
Did you say you have something interesting to say about the name of the capital?
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I kind of find out when a Russian friend came to Brazil in 2014 for the Soccer World Cup. I'm not sure if you guys are into soccer.
I mean, soccer is not very big in the U.S., to be honest with you.
Yeah, so when she asked which city I lived, and I answered Brasilia, she was like, yes, I know you live in Brazil, but I would like to know which city in Brazil. And I kept saying Brasilia. And then after a few minutes, I realized that Brasilia could be Brazil in Russian. And actually it is. If you check on Google Translate, Brasilia is Brazil in Russian. And this city was designed and built by communists in the 60s.
Really?
Yeah.
That's way more interesting than your Russian friend story. Tell us about that.
And the buildings are still standing?
Yes, they are. But, concrete buildings, they don't last long.
So it's like is it a lot of like brutalist kind of Stalinist looking architecture, or is it, I mean, designed by communists, is it an attractive city or what?
Well, most people don't feel comfortable when they come here. It's a very weird city. There is actually a book about Soviet cities. When this Russian, I'll talk about the book later. But when this Russian friend came, she said, "Oh, this looks a lot like Russian cities." So it's really, I'm used to it because I was born here, but most people think it's weird.
How did it happen to be that the city was designed and built by communists in the first place?
Well, it's part of Brazilian history. I don't know if we're going through that, and it's closely related to Bolsonaro, how Bolsonaro got in power. During the Cold War, Brazil was threatened by the communists, and they were in power in the 60s, in the mid 50s to the 60s. But maybe we should and maybe try to trace a history line with the main points.
Sorry, Felipe, you broke up just at the end there. So you said they were in power in the 50s and 60s, and then I don't know, James and Rap, if you guys could hear him, but you broke up for me. I couldn't hear the rest of what you said.
I mean, it's a little bit of a deep dive on Brazilian history to get into that, but I will say that, you know, from an American perspective, that we know very little, if anything, about Brazilian history. The main images we tend to get of the country are the multicolored roofs and favelas in Brazil. For some reason, they advertise that on like our, like travel guides and stuff, as if that would be a section of the town you'd want to go to or something.
Yeah, I would say the downside of talking to a largely American or certainly largely Anglophone audience for you as a Brazilian is that, you know, like Rapture said, we're pretty parochial people, so we don't really know a lot. But the upside is basically everything or anything you say will be novel to us because, you know, we don't know anything. So give us the context. Why? So the communists took power in the mid 50s?
Yes. Actually, there is. So how can I begin? It's the Cold War context we are in at this moment, and I found the book. It's called The Ideal Communist City. Just before I answer your question, it was written at the Moscow University, and the main author is Alexei Gutanov. It's easy to find on the internet, and if you want a good description of Brasilia, you can read this book.
So when the communists took power, was Brasilia, did it even exist? Like, was it already there in some form just as a town that they built up, or did they build it from the ground up?
Brasilia was built from the ground up from 1956 to 1960.
Wow.
Before that, the capital was Rio de Janeiro.
Rio de Janeiro seems like a more obvious capital just because it's a much more famous city. When people say Brazil, you know, people, at least when I say people, what I really mean is Americans. When Americans think of Brazil, we think of Rio, right? We think of the concrete Christ and we think of the beautiful shoreline. I don't even have a mental picture in my mind of Brasilia. Do you think it would have been smarter to keep, you know, in retrospect, do you think it would have been smarter to keep Rio as the capital?
You know, it would be fair to the population, I would say, because one of the principles of this book, for instance, is that you have to keep the government away from the population, and bringing the capital from where the population is, such as Rio de Janeiro, which is the second largest city in Brazil, to the middle of the country, in the middle of nowhere. There was nothing here, nothing at all. It was sort of a bold move from the government, and it was, I think it wasn't fair to the population. Even today, we can see that the largest cities are São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, and they are far from Brasilia. And when there are protests, they occur at São Paulo and at Rio, not in Brasilia. In Brasilia, there are smaller protests.
This is kind of
the politicians don't feel under pressure.
This is kind of a common thing with communist states, though. Just to make a comparison, Kazakhstan, they built their capital in the middle of nowhere, out of the desert, and it was for the same exact reason. about keeping it away from the center of population of the country. That way, if there's any unrest, there's hundreds of miles of buffer zone between the government and the center of population.
That's it.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense because, like you said, they're having these protests, but the protests are far away from where the politicians actually are. They aren't even really like experiencing them.
It kind of eerily reminds me of Washington, D.C., how it's not a state, or I've heard that it's not technically part of the country, but I don't really know the legal standing with it. I also tossed some
part
images.
of the country, but it doesn't count as its own state.
So it's kind of, it operates outside of the boundaries of states. I also tossed some
it's governed
images.
directly by Congress.
Right. Yes, that's true. We think of it as having a mayor, right? But it only has a mayor, basically at the indulgence of Congress. So basically, when Washington D.C. was a young city, I don't know, for the first 150 years or so of the nation's life, Congress actually did directly govern it, and they wrote all the laws, like in DC and stuff like that. And then at some point they said, okay, well, we're going to delegate this mandate that we have to govern the District of Columbia to the people who live here to elect, I think there's a city council now and there's a mayor who, or whatever. But you're right, Rapture. It is kind of weird. There is something like inorganic about having a capital that isn't, that wasn't like a big population center, but was just something you built from the ground up. So what we're looking at now on the screen is this is Brasilia. This is the city, which actually doesn't look that bad to me. I love the water. The water is beautiful. What is that, Felipe? Is that a lake or is that a river? What is that?
Yeah, it's an artificial lake called Lake Paranoá.
Paranoá. What does that mean?
I have no idea. It's an Indian word.
Oh, okay. And so there was nobody there when they started building the city. So what about a population? Did people just come there naturally, or did the communists have to like import people to become the citizens of this city?
Yeah, in the beginning they had to import to build the city, but as time passed, people started to come because the government has very good jobs. They pay very well. And so attracted people, and commerce, business began to grow along with the population. So now the metro area is around, it's nearly 3 million people now.
Wow, that's quite large. So is that how your parents ended up there? They came for government work or something like that? Because you said you were born there, right?
Yes, I was born here, but my parents weren't. And my generation is mostly like this. My father came from a state, a southern state called Rio Grande do Sul. If you want, I can explain a little bit about what Brazil is. It's a federation. And my mother came from another state, which is a little bit closer, and they met here, and I'm a product of their love.
Sure, yeah. Tell us a little bit about the federal model of Brazil. So you said a sovereign state, which is, that's an idea that U.S. citizens will be sort of familiar with, the idea that of a nation sort of composed of a bunch of smaller member states that retain some amount of sovereignty. So Brazil is like the U.S. in that respect?
Yes, it kind of. Actually, when I was studying about the United States, I used to draw parallels with Brazil. So maybe we can try this the other way around. For instance, the United States have 51 states, right?
50, just 50.
50. Yeah. Brazil has 27 states and a federal district. So we also have states.
And a federal district, just like us. We have the District of Columbia. This is like conspicuously similar. Was this intentional on somebody's part? Did somebody in Brazil say, "Hey, the U.S. they've got a really interesting system. It seems like it's working well. We should just copy them." Is that what happened, or?
That's exactly what happened, and it's part of Brazilian history. Until 1889, Brazil was an empire. And then there was a military coup that took over the power and was born the United States of Brazil.
Well, I
Wow.
should say I'm flattered, just first and foremost, that you guys would look to us to.
It was communists looking to us, right?
Well,
No,
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 because
no.
the military
No?
coup. So the communists, Felipe,
That
this
was
is where,
much later. Okay.
yeah, this is where I get my marks as a student. You can tell me if I was. This is sort of the quiz. You can tell me if I was paying attention well enough or not. So the communists took power in the middle 50s, but this was in what, 1890, 1889, somewhere around there.
Sorry, the communists didn't take power. They were trying to. The president in the 60s that was taken from power at another military coup in 1964 was closely related to communists. So just to make it clear, Brazil wasn't taken by communists in the 60s.
It's
It
really
was almost.
interesting. It's really interesting how all these, attempts at revolution occurred during the 60s at the same time, around the same time involving communism. You had, of course, the Chinese Cultural Revolution, the whole hippie movement across the West. And you see all these stories across the world. Like, we know so little about South American history and Central American history and various other histories. It's always surprising to me when people mention the 1960s as a period of communist attempts at revolution.
We can always think of Cuba. Their revolution occurred during this period of time. Chile had a military dictatorship, also the Pinochet, right? I think you have heard of him.
The helicopters.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we're big fans. Well, actually, I don't know much about them, to be honest. But
Oh, the
Big fan.
helicopter memes are very popular here.
Well, I am actually I am an unironic fan of Augusto Pinochet. The election of Allende was later than the 60s, though. Wasn't that in the middle 70s? I feel like it was in the mid 70s that happened.
I think so too. I'm not sure, to be honest.
But it is sort of, Rapture's point is really good, though, because there was this sort of period of almost like a mass hysteria around the world where all of a sudden, these sort of Marxist forces, either economically explicitly Marxist or just culturally Marxist, there was this huge surge. They had their high water mark, and it must have seemed, I say it seemed as if I lived through it, I didn't, but it must have seemed to the people at the time as if the world was on the verge of collapse.
Yes, I agree with you.
I don't know if they felt it was on collapse. Whenever you watch movies from the time or documentaries about the time, there was a real excitement. I mean, people didn't have the internet or even video games. They were going to the local parks and hanging out and playing guitar, and they're really excited. They felt like just things were changing, and that they finally. The young felt like they had the reins of power in their hands.
That's the American perspective with drugs, alcohol, concerts, and
it is.
And rolling hills
the
to lay on. That's not the. I would doubt that's the Brazilian perspective with men with guns marching through the streets. That's this feeling of euphoria was not universal. But I think the lesson to take from this time in history, especially for my good friend Rapture, is that things are not set in stone and things change much more rapidly and suddenly than people expect.
Yes,
Well, I
and
mean,
also that.
you could
Oh,
look
go
at
ahead.
the Cultural Revolution in China, and these are young people. They were excited. They were beating up their history teachers, and so they were riding around in military vehicles. And when I say excitement, I mean that you can't get much more of a contrast between the Chinese and, like, say, people in California, at least back then, I guess. Uh, I mean, they're having different experiences, but I don't know. I just view it as kind of a youthful movement that it sprang up around the world at the same time.
So it's much like us then.
Yeah, it is. It's a good point.
I guess. I mean, I'd like to think we're a little more encompassing. I mean,
Zoomers forever.
Yeah, well, no, I mean that is really salient, James, because it was a young movement, and ours is a young movement. It was countercultural, right?
Very.
And it was subversive, and our movement is subversive, of the dominant establishment, of the dominant norms, not subversive of like nature and natural law like the hippie movement, like let's say the worst excesses of the like free love 60s and 70s were, but subversive in a sense.
Well, now we can just call that, normal everyday society, quite frankly.
So Felipe, let's get back to this history lesson because I was really enjoying this. So in the you guys had one military coup in 1889 to take you from an imperial state to a federated nation, and then you have another military coup in what, 1965? When was you mentioned that there was another coup?
64, but there is one thing you should know about Brazil. Since it became a republic, we can't actually say we are a fairly stable country. For instance, we've had 9 constitutions from 1889 to 1988 to 2019.
Wow, Magapedes would go crazy over that. 9 constitutions?
9 constitutions. And the current constitution from 1988, it has already 99 amendments, constitutional amendments, compared to your constitution, the American Constitution.
It's hard to even remember the ones we have here.
Well, Americans just love the first 2.
And that one about drinking alcohol again.
Well, I guess what he's getting at is that his system is a lot more in flux than the situation in Brazil fluctuates much more rapidly. We built, I mean, a certain ossification was built into the American system, right? I mean, the people who established our government intentionally made it very, very difficult to change, so that only if there was the idea was only if there was a sort of a huge, overwhelming consensus that in agreement on, for example, an amendment to the Constitution, would it actually happen. And it seems like in Brazil, it's much more catch as catch can. Am I right about that, Felipe?
Yes, you're right. And I said this because we've had other coups. In 1934, we had another coup. So we have coups over and over again. We have a coup, and then we go to a democratic state. Then another coup, and then a democratic era. And then a coup. And it goes on like this.
Do you are you a firm believer in democracy?
I can't say I like democracy. I'm more a Republican guy. There is actually this American guy. I keep forgetting his name. I'll remember in a few. He always used to say during his show, the United States is not a democracy. It's a republic. So I tend to prefer the government of the law, not the government of the majority.
Why
But
do you
it's a
think?
personal view.
Why do you think it is that? Well, let me ask you this: other than just the initial legal framework that we had as a starting point versus what you had as a starting point in 1889 or 1890, do you think that there's anything fundamentally different between our societies that makes yours more volatile or more prone, for example, to these successive military coups?
It's very complex because we're talking about culture and history. We have a very different history, the United States and Brazil, and even religion has a very big influence in the society. So we could talk all night about this.
Okay, well, I guess we should. If we do that, then we're never gonna catch up to the present. So let's, I guess, let's skip a bit, like they say in the Holy Grail. Let's skip a bit, brother, and get to what was the situation prior to the election of Bolsonaro. So the last person that we like in the U.S., the last name that we heard in the news before Bolsonaro was elected was Dilma Rousseff. So, what can you tell us about the situation pre-Bolsonaro?
So before Bolsonaro, we had nearly 16 years of uh, Workers' Party government. They are a far left uh, party, and they were starting to change Brazil again to a socialist country. And we've had some trouble during their government. We had a big corruption scandal in 2004. It was called in Portuguese mensalão. It was basically voting buying, but they couldn't reach the president Lula da Silva. Not sure if you probably know of him.
Yeah, I've heard the name
He's
in the news, but like,
he's in jail now.
yeah,
The former president is in jail now. And then there was another big corruption scandal, car wash operation. It began this way. Also, voting buying at the Congress, and also money laundering and stealing, simple plain stealing. And then we got into a very bad recession in 2014. Our GDP went down nearly 5% at 1 year. Inflation went to 10% official inflation. So we had also a very rough time in economics. And then Dilma was impeached in 2016. I can't. I don't believe I forget now. Yes, I think it was 16. And then her vice president took over, and then things started to change. People got fed up with that is Dilma Rousseff on the screen. Uh, the main point is we've had a very bad government. I think we had with the Workers' Party, and people got fed up, and Bolsonaro seemed to be the only way out from the old politicians, and people gave him a chance. That's what I would say. And
Well,
he's actually an outsider from all of these guys.
Well, it seems to me that uh, being the outsider Bolsonaro he seems to be trying to make real change. I just jotted down some of the stuff that I generally know about Brazil. I know that his cabinet, his executive, is much smaller than the previous one, and it has a lot of and please correct me if I'm wrong, but it has a lot of technocratic, technocratic members, military men, people who aren't politicians, who are now
Yes,
running a lot of Brazil.
that is exactly what is happening. As I'm inside the government, I have seen this. But it's only May. It's so government is still trying to begin. It's hard to change something that has been a different way since I can say 1995.
So the transition is going to take a long time.
It is. It is. And the Brazilian society is actually divided.
Wait, so
What is happening in Brazil happened in the United States during the elections in 2016. It's very similar.
I'm really
That's when I met Ted, actually.
Well, I'm sorry, Rapture, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I was going to say, from my personal perspective, Bolsonaro already seems more effective than Donald Trump has been. I view Bolsonaro and the stuff that I personally know about him as, the Brazil got the Donald Trump that America wanted.
You think so?
I do. Donald Trump talked about draining the swamp, which he really didn't do. But Bolsonaro threw the whole swamp out the window and has brought in all this technical expertise. I know, for example, that your science minister, your technology minister, is a former astronaut. These are people who know what they're doing. Whereas Donald Trump has brought in all these people who are whispering dumb stuff in his ear, and he's an easily manipulated person. Bolsonaro seems like a very strong, resolute leader.
Well, the grass is always greener on the other side. Felipe, I know this might be sort of a sensitive question to ask you since you work in the government, but what is your impression on the effectiveness of Bolsonaro? Do you think that he's been successful largely, or has it mostly been talk and not a lot of walk?
Well, here's the picture. Bolsonaro was elected president, but as in the United States, we also have a Congress. And the Congress is not fully aligned with Bolsonaro. So what he can do, he is doing, but he needs the Congress to vote the main changes.
I was going to ask, because you said it's similar to the divisions in the U.S. during 2016 presidential election. What are the main, would you say, dividing points in Brazilian, democratic voter split? Like, what are the things that really matter to the people? Because, okay, here in the United States, we could say, okay, well, on the one side, you have people that just want to keep the America from decades prior, and they're conservatives, and they don't like all this progressive behavior. On the other side, you have people that are really pushing for all these types of rights, like the LGBTQ plus and the various minorities trying to assert themselves in ways that they never had before, and to try to reduce.
Rapture, it's kind of insensitive of you to forget the other 50 identities after the plus.
That's right.
Oh, yeah, I mean,
bigot.
I have to get into like dingbats or wingbats because we run out of letters in the alphabet. But yeah, I don't know. It seemed it's easy for us on the right to paint it as you have the conservatives and the crazies. I'm just curious if you could elucidate it all about, like, what are like the divisions amongst the people in Brazil? What are the causes for their political disagreements, I guess?
I will say my point of view. But Brazil has 35 parties, and we like to joke here that there are 33 shades of red. Most parties here are leftists, are liberals, as you say. And the conservative movement began to appear in 2015, something like that. It began to grow, and then you can picture Brazil just like you see the United States. There is a sort of, I don't know, a polarization of left and right. I'm not saying I agree. You have you probably noticed that I don't agree with the left, but I didn't say this about me. I'm a Catholic, a faithful Catholic. So I still have some things that I need to work out with conservatives. Anyway, uh, so nowadays we have left versus right in Brazil, and Bolsonaro is the politician that was able to pull to attract to himself the votes from the right. The conservative movement began
So
to grow.
I have read that a lot of the people who pardon me, a lot of the people.
What is going on there?
I dropped my notebook on my microphone. I have
We have
read
I
that.
just want to say we have the absolute best Foley artists here on the Politics of Three. Sound effects, courtesy of the.
You're welcome.
All right, go ahead, James. Sorry.
I have read that it was a lot of young people who voted for Bolsonaro, like 18 to 24 range was like his sweet spot with voters. So it's this youngest generation that's kind of bucking the political trend.
Exactly. Bolsonaro became popular when he was only a meme. I like it. People tend to think it's crazy, but it's not. Even meme wars were important during the American elections and during the Brazilian elections.
Now, he became a really big name after he got stabbed before his nomination.
That was the first I had ever heard about him.
Well, wait a second. We might be making an assumption there because he became a big name in the U.S. after he got stabbed. Was that pivotal in Brazil, Felipe, or was he already well known before that?
He was already very well known because he got in many. We have a liberal media here, just like in the U.S. And so the media started talking about him, but trying to say bad things about him. But there is no bad marketing, right? The good marketing is talking about him. So people started getting to know about Bolsonaro and his speeches and things that he says that the liberals don't like. And people agree with him. Many people agree with him. That's how he got here.
Do liberals and progressives in Brazil accuse him of dog whistling about any issues? And if so, what are those issues?
The same words: homophobic, sexist, and even some people even call him a Nazi. It's a pattern. The left the Western world.
Sorry, did he cut out for you guys too, or was that just for me?
Yeah, I didn't hear the last word or last category that he mentioned.
Yeah, Felipe, what we heard was that they call him a sexist and a Nazi, and that it's a pattern. But then you cut out. What was the last thing you said?
There is a pattern in the Western world, and the left is the same in any country you go. They follow certain cultural Marxist schools, such as the Frankfurt School and the Chicago School. Some authors from those decades.
So with, if they're calling him all these terrible things, a racist and a Nazi and all these things, has the composition of his government made that worse? I remember when on the day he took office and I saw a picture of his new cabinet, which by American standards is huge. but by Brazilian standards is rather small. You know, there were only 2 women, and there were no black people or Asians or natives. It was all white people and Hispanic people. So is that a point of contention in Brazil, that his cabinet is so kind of monocultural?
Yes, the liberal media complained a lot, but the population agreed with most of them. The astronaut, for instance, Paulo Guedes, who is the one of the main ministries in Brazil, the Ministry of Economy. He's what you guys call a Chicago boy. He studied at Illinois. He's a big fan of Milton Friedman. I'm not sure if you guys are into economics.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm also a fan of Milton Friedman. Keep going.
Ted is the economics guy, for sure.
Yeah, but before that we had Keynesian, and even an almost Marxist economist at the Ministry of Economy. So it's a huge shift we're living in Brazil. And we also have Sérgio Moro at the Ministry, who is now the Minister of Justice. He's even more loved than Bolsonaro.
See, I read on, and this is my more political specialty, quote unquote, about your foreign minister, Ernesto, and I'm sorry about the last name, Ernesto Arujo. I'm sorry, I don't speak Portuguese. But he stood out to me personally because, and please correct me if I get any part of the story wrong, but he wrote, he had been a low-level diplomat in the Brazilian foreign ministry, and then he wrote some op-ed piece after the election about how Brazil had to get back to its Western Christian European founding roots, and then he was made the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Yeah, Bolsonaro has a group of people around him that are his personal advisors. One of these guys is a Brazilian called Olavo de Carvalho. He lives in the United States. And he advised Bolsonaro some of the ministries, and one of them is Ernesto Araújo. So even if he's a low-level guy, it was a personal advisor of the president who gave that name, and Bolsonaro agreed with it. That's how Ernesto got there, basically.
Okay.
You said that there was a minister who is even more popular than Bolsonaro. Who is that?
It's Sérgio Moro. He is the judge who sentenced ex-president Lula da Silva to prison. He was the main judge of the biggest corruption investigation in Brazil. It's still going on, this investigation, and Sérgio got popular, and Bolsonaro decided to invite him to the government, and he accepted.
And so what is his role now, currently?
Right now, as Minister of Justice, he's trying to do some reforms at the legal level. He sent to the Congress a set of new laws so the Congress can discuss to avoid corruption, because the legal system in Brazil is it's complicated. So that's what he's trying to do now. He's trying to change laws.
So he's like an anti-corruption czar, in other words. He's recommending. So he doesn't have, obviously, because I guess it works the same with you guys in terms of the separation between an executive and a legislative. But he's just recommending to the legislature measures that they could implement to combat corruption.
Yes, that's it. And also making changes in the government structure, our federal police, our FBI, for instance.
So that was something I wanted to ask about, the changes he's making. the one I read about this, and this was in Swedish news media, um, during a rather lulled week in our own news. I read a thing. I know a dull week in Swedish news is pretty rare.
Well, you don't need to. You don't need to get a subtle dig in there against the guy about the popularity of Brazilian current events in Sweden.
Do you live in Sweden, James?
Yeah, I do. And I read that one of the first things Bolsonaro did when he took office was he took away all the monetary and land grant rights of what would be your equivalent to the Bureau of Native American Affairs in the United States. I think yours is called the National Indian Rights Foundation or something. He took away all their like special privileges.
Yes, he did. Bolsonaro did that. We have companies guerrilla in Brazil. They weren't treated that way before by the Workers' Party government, but they are being treated like this now. Sorry. You're talking about Native Americans. Yeah, there are some distortions in Brazil. It's very complicated. We have too many native Indian areas in Brazil that could be economically explored, for instance, mining, but it's a way of the left to take control of these groups, native Indians, minorities in general, and start using them to push their leftist agenda.
So I just want to say real quick, we were talking about Sergio Moro, who our guest, Felipe, our Brazilian correspondent, claims is even more popular in Brazil than Jair Bolsonaro. The image that is currently on your screen is Sergio Moro. Sergio Moro, again, this sort of no-nonsense judge who presided over the corruption trial of Dilma Rousseff and was tapped by Bolsonaro to become part of his new cabinet as sort of an anti-corruption czar. Is all that correct, Felipe?
Yeah, actually, it's all correct, but the ex-president that was investigated was Lula da Silva, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva.
It was Da Silva, not Rousseff. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that correction. So I am very encouraged by the point that James brought up earlier about Bolsonaro's base of support. One of the sort of big parts of the base of his support coming from young people, the 18 to 30 voting bloc. Who comprises, what are the sort of demographic blocks that comprise the anti-Bolsonaro contingent within Brazil?
Well, I would say it's mixed. There are many young people, but there are people my age and even older than me. I can actually try to look. I saw only last year the probable voters of Bolsonaro. I need to check this to be more precise. But it's not only formed by the younglings.
Sure,
sorry,
but
not
I guess
the younglings, but the young people.
Sure, but my question, Felipe, is okay. So people like you, you know, you're in your mid 30s, and you're obviously like a working professional. You have a government job. Young people who are into the memes. These are the people who support Bolsonaro, and I'm sure there are other people who do as well. Who, if you could paint the picture of the like demographic, if you could give us a demographic sketch of the people who are opposed to Bolsonaro, who are they?
It's mixed. You can't. At least I don't. I can't. I'm not able to separate demographically. Maybe you can say, I mean, regionally, the northeast region of Brazil is not pro-Bolsonaro. In general, the majority is against Bolsonaro.
Well, like the guy who stabbed him, what were his grievances? Was he a communist or something?
He was related to a socialist party.
Wow.
Yeah, he was. But the investigations are still going on. So
I'm kind of curious, like the people who support Bolsonaro, in a way, they seem to be reacting to progressivism, much like here in the US. And it's easy to point to things like, once again, the LGBT movement and communism. But see, here in the US, most of the older American types are what we call descendants of, Europe or white. And it really feels like we're about to lose our country. Is there a similar feeling in Brazil to any degree? And is Bolsonaro support, is it in any way driven by what the left likes to call fear? People worried about losing their country.
We don't have any. Actually, we do have an immigration problem now because of what's happening in Venezuela. But before that, the issues were a little bit different. I'm not sure if when you say demographics, you're talking about race. Is that it?
Yeah, I
Well,
would say race principally, but also religion. Sorry, I mean, I guess it's your question, Rapture, but just to give my own quick 2 cents, I would say race principally, but also religion and culture. What were you going to say, Rap? Sorry.
I was just going to say it's hard for us to really understand here in the U.S. because, like, race is a big issue here, whether people want to talk about it or not. I don't know to what degree it is in Brazil. And, if it's not something you feel comfortable talking about, that's fine. But most of my personal exposure to Brazil, which is very, very limited, comes from, some films I saw in the early 2000s. And they usually focused around, once again, the favelas in Rio de Janeiro. It seemed like race was a big issue. And I just don't know if that's really true or representative of at all about the country as a whole. So maybe racial identity isn't, the politics of it isn't as important in your country. Is that what I'm picking up on?
Yes, you're right. Brazil has a mixed up race. Most of our population is mixed. We call pardos. And it's history again. Unlike the U.S., where you have a white population and a Native American population and Afro-descendant population, if I want to be politically correct. In Brazil, it's all mixed. As you can see, our skin is a little brownish because we're mixed. So what happens is more of a regional difference. As you see, there is a map of Brazil there. You can see that Northeast voted for the left wing guy, Fernando Haddad. These are the poor states. These are the people that usually are taken by the populist speeches. And there is a very strong division in Brazil on the north with the south. I'm not saying it's as strong as the US once had, and it became even a civil war, but things became very, very tense.
Who is it looks like one of the sovereign states that comprise Brazil voted for somebody who, I feel bad for him. He gets like the runner-up prize. Who is Ciro Gomes?
This guy is probably going to be the main name on the left side. in 2022. You see, this party, PT and PDT, they are members of an international group called Foro de São Paulo, and they gather many parties in Latin America, only socialist and communist parties, and their main goal is to turn Latin America what the Soviet Union once was. This is very serious.
So is this guy even further to the left than Haddad?
He's a different kind of left, but both of them are radical leftist guys.
A different kind of left. That's enigmatic.
Yeah. There are so many types of left. There are Trotskyists, Maoists, Stalinists, Gramscists, Marxists. The left, it's part of the Hegelian mindset.
Were you implying that a lot of the people supporting a more communist agenda are poor, and so they would prefer communism? Because here in the U.S., it tends to be minorities and kind of like upper class white people who like they form this what's that called? Is it called the Coalition of the Ascended? I forget the term, but they form this weird union to kind of push for far leftism. And I wonder if it's the same there, if you have like kind of like an upper class that are just, they're leftist, but they're completely kind of removed from the anyone below them on the socioeconomic ladder.
Yeah, the rich guy, we call the rich socialists the iPhone socialists. They are socialists, but they eat caviar. They have iPhones and
they pretend to want communism.
Yeah, yes, that's exactly. But here we don't have minorities. Our minorities are the poor people, the very, very poor people, and these people they're kind of being practical. The communists promise them heaven on earth, and they go for it and keep voting them. This time the leftists lost the general elections, but they are still very strong in Brazil.
Is the situation in Venezuela, obviously socialism has been an abject disaster for that country, and it's sort of like, you know, right next door to you guys you have an example of like, well, here's a country that really embraced leftism and we can watch it sort of collapse right in our backyard. Has the sort of leftist political coalition in Brazil taken a big hit in terms of public perception because of that?
Yes, it has, and Bolsonaro used it. He said, I don't want Brazil to become like Venezuela. Just look at them. And people realized he was speaking the truth. Bolsonaro, I think he's a very honest guy. But I started looking at him in 2014, and he was only a meme. He was only a congressman. But he used the Venezuela situation in his favor.
This is why I come back to I think Bolsonaro is he's the president that America wanted.
But he's not dealing with the same issues.
But the conservatives here really like Trump.
Yeah, this is a good segue. So, sort of by way of an introduction to this, I would say James, out of the three of us, is probably the most cynical on Trump.
I'm not. Maybe I am cynical, but I'm cynical because of facts.
Okay, well, on the other hand, I am like I'm certainly, I would say, to be fair, a Trump partisan. I have very high level of voter satisfaction with our current president. And then,
Well,
Rapture,
Ted,
where are you? Remind me, where do you stand on this?
Really, with Trump, I take what I can get, and I fear the other side at this point.
So
Yeah, I'm kind of like Rapture nowadays.
that's how you feel in terms of Bolsonaro. You're just taking what you can get.
Yes, but I think he can do a good job here, and I also think Trump can do a good job in the United States.
Well, that was going to
But
be my question. So, what is the perception of Trump in Brazil? How do Brazilians view the U.S. in general, and then Trump specifically?
most of Brazilians don't like Trump.
Oh,
Yeah, but
that's a
here's the
shame.
thing:
Why?
our liberal media drinks from CNN. If I
Do
can
they
say
think
it.
he's racist?
Most of them think he's actually the mono, not racist, but I think
we couldn't get that lucky.
they think he's sexist, and they think Trump is sexist, and he's too full of himself. You know, silly things, but they're not seeing what probably Trump is trying to do there. I can't grasp as well. I try to watch YouTube and sometimes Fox News, but it's really hard to understand what's going on there now.
Well, is there kind of a contradiction there? Because it has seemed to me, actually, I think the first episode that we did on this channel was called Geopolitical Roundabout. And we concluded the episode by talking about some of the sort of bright spots on the globe where it seemed like there could sort of be like an international coalition of nationalists if the leaders of respective countries wanted that. And two of the bright spots that we highlighted were one, the United States with Trump, and two, Brazil with Bolsonaro. And it has also seemed to me, although you obviously have a much more in-depth perspective on this than I do, that Bolsonaro has not been anti-Trump since he's been elected. He's been sort of friendly towards the U.S. and towards our president. So is there sort of a contradiction going on there? Where is there some cognitive dissonance where Brazilians elect this guy Bolsonaro, and then Bolsonaro seems to like Trump, but Brazilians themselves don't like Trump?
Well, you can see even domestically, the same people who voted for Bolsonaro as president voted for a socialist guy to the Congress. It's weird. But however, Bolsonaro really likes Trump. Bolsonaro, I'm not sure if I can say he's a big fan of Trump, but he likes a lot what Trump is doing in the US, and he's trying to do his own way based on Trump in Brazil. The conservatives in Brazil are kind of try to learn with the American experience in 2016.
I have another question I'd like to ask, if I could sneak it in. It's kind of unrelated. And okay, so here in the U.S., when we look at, and I'll try to be very careful with my wording, but when we look at, say, Muslims in the United States, they tend to side with the left, even if ideologically they're far to the right within their own, religious circles. They vote with the left because they're forming this coalition against a kind of a nativist. Yeah, pretty much against Whitey. I'm curious, is there any kind of political...
A spade is a spade, Rapture.
is there any kind of political turmoil involving Islam in Brazil, or is it just a non-issue? I don't even know what the numbers are like there. Because here, they've started to take senatorial seats, and they're developing enclaves and taking over some towns. So
we don't have Islam yet on politics, but they are sneaking in slowly in Brazil. Brazil is not I think it's not a country of interest for a country of interest for them yet. But there are some small communities in Brazil.
I see. And what about the other things I wanted to ask you really quick were about concerns over foreign influence, and also it seems like most countries around the world are really they're kind of selling out to China, and China tends to buy up a lot of land, property, resources. I wonder, are they getting stakes in Brazil as well?
Yeah, China was investing a lot in Brazil during the Workers' Party government. There is this group called the BRICS: Brazil, Russia, China, India, and South Africa. So Brazil became a close partner to China, and they started investing here. But Bolsonaro came in, and he said he wanted to get closer to the US. And it already became a problem here. The media started hitting him because Brazil depends on China, on foreign commerce, and the Chinese were investing hard here. So
Yeah.
it's very important for Brazil to get to close this relationship with the US, commercially speaking, at least.
What do you mean close the relationship?
Yeah, increase trade between countries.
Okay, because the U.S. used to be more of a manufacturing country way back in the day, and we kind of gave that up and sold out to China. They're making all of our goods, and I assume they're also making making most of the goods for many other countries, perhaps Brazil included. So if we try to get buddy with Brazil at the expense of China, you may lose out on a lot of your cheaply manufactured goods.
Well, there's always Mexico.
On the other hand, well, wait a second. On the other hand, a big part of the advantage that China has over us is that the cost of living in the U.S. is much, much higher than it is in China. So Chinese labor is a lot cheaper. The advantage really is the labor price differential. And that differential is going to be, I would assume, and Felipe, please, rebuke me if I'm making a bad assumption here. That differential is going to be much slimmer between Brazil and China than it is between the U.S. and China.
Sorry, I missed your question.
What I'm saying is China's ability to undercut the U.S. manufacturing base was dependent on, or came as a result of, a huge differential, a big difference in the price of labor in the U.S. versus in China. And I would guess that the difference between the price of labor in the United States and China is much greater than it is between Brazil and China. Am I right about that, Felipe?
The cost of labor in Brazil is extremely high.
Oh, really? Okay, so I was wrong.
Yeah, so no, we have a serious problem with taxes here in Brazil. We tax the population like Europeans do, but we are a poor country.
Woo! Europe for the win.
The Europeans are at least rich. We are not. So we're taxing.
Well, we used to be.
You still are.
So in that case, do you think you're seeing the same thing, is Rapture's concern is that something that you guys are worried about in terms of China undercutting your manufacturing base?
They have been cutting our manufacturing base, but the Ministry of Economy is more like a free trade guy. So yes, he wants to help the Brazilian manufacturers to develop, but he also wants to increase trade with the US and your manufactured products and even services. Uh, it could be a win-win situation to Brazil and the US. I think so, at least. Uh, and we can still trade with China, but I personally believe Bolsonaro wants to decrease commerce with China and increase with the US, or at least keep China where it is at, and focus on business with the US.
So on the topic, what are sort of the principal pillars of Brazil's economy? How do you guys, how do you guys make money?
So regarding trade,
Well,
we
just
we
like, oh, sorry, go ahead.
oh, we sell commodities. Brazil is a commodity country in foreign trade. We sell mining products and grains, meat to the Islamic countries. In the foreign trade, we are not big. Our domestic industry serves the domestic economy. We don't export so many cars or machines. We sell to the South American countries, some African countries, but it's mostly commodities.
Now, are you guys, are you in OPEC? Are you an oil exporting country? Or
No,
do
we're
you,
not.
no?
No,
Okay.
but we do have large oil reserves, especially at the deep sea that was found in 2005. It was announced,
Now,
but it's
are you guys exploiting those right now, or is it just that they're sitting there, but you're not really drilling them?
we have been trying to, but uh, when the oil price went down, it became impossible to take from there because the break even back 10 years ago was $40 a barrel to take from the deep sea. Now
Right.
it's around $30 US dollars a barrel. And now technology evolved. But at at the same time we found these oil reserves, you had the shale gas revolution in the US. So it was a big thing.
It was sort of good timing for us, bad timing for you, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
Uh,
Now that oil prices are going up again, many fields are being developed, but we don't know how long it's going to last. Until
So
then, they have to improve technology.
speaking of the ocean, I had read that Bolsonaro is very interested in military expansion in Brazil, kind of revamping your armed forces, which are very small for a nation with such a large population.
Yes, it is small, uh, and yes, he wants to invest in the military. He is from the military. He was a captain. He is a captain. Now he's the president, but he is a military himself. So
Oh, all
actually,
right.
some people are worried because Venezuela has a strong militia and a very armed military.
Well, I can say as a Swede that I was very happy that Brazil buys our fighter jets. So just keep doing that, and you'll be okay.
Yeah, but there is a corruption investigation going on about that.
Well, what
oh,
happened?
yeah. Tell us about that.
What happened with
I
with our
don't know.
beautiful Swedish fighter jets?
I don't know specifics, but it looks like we were dealing with French, if I'm correct. And then something happened, and they closed deal with the Swedish.
Yeah, you bought the Saab Gripens, which were just fantastic planes. Way better than anything America makes.
Well, James, I can't fault you for being a good salesman. But uh, I just want to give a fake news warning for any of the listeners. That's all.
Hey, the F-35 crashes into the ocean and catches on fire. You will not have those problems with the Saab Gripen. It stays in the air and it hits what it shoots at.
Yeah, the Saab Gripen never crashes. It's a crashless plane. I'm surprised nobody thought of inventing that before.
There has been one crash, and it was done by an Asian dude. So
Asian drivers, what can you do?
We all know they can't drive.
Even crash-proof jets are not immune from Asian drivers.
They are not immune to the Asian behind the wheel.
Right?
Was it an Asian woman?
I don't know. I know it was Taiwan, or not Taiwan, Thailand. They had just got it too. We just sent them the fighter jet and wham, right into the ground.
Yeesh.
I wanted to ask Felipe just a couple of quick questions while we have him on, which we've been talking for a while, so maybe we should wrap up soon. But
I want to say real quick, Felipe, thank you so much for staying with us so long. This is fascinating stuff. If at any point you have to duck out, please don't be shy. This is really great.
Oh, I thank you. And I can't say I represent the majority of the population here, and just giving my personal views. Surely you can check with other people as well, other Brazilian people.
Sure. Well, yeah. So we kind of get an idea of what your position is, and then your views according to that position. But here in the U.S., obviously, we're having a hard time with our southern border with Mexico and Central America. And I was curious what Brazilians think about that, if they know much about it at all. I don't know. It's big in the news cycle here. I'm curious, do they think that U.S. should just let people in, or do they think that Trump should close the border? And I also just wanted to get any kind of update on any kind of refugee, quote unquote, crisis going on your own borders.
As we hear, the news were showing that those groups, which country did they go from? Nicaragua, Guatemala,
Honduras, Ecuador, I believe.
Yeah, it's not one country. It's Honduras. A bunch of the caravans started in Honduras. Some of them are from Ecuador is correct. Guatemala. Some of the caravan contingents came from Guatemala. So it's like a consortium of.
So there are some group. The conservative people think the U.S. shouldn't build the wall, as Trump says. The other part, which I think is the largest part, think the U.S. should allow them in. And there is a third group that really doesn't have an opinion, because we've never seen this before. To Brazil, this wasn't a problem before. It's becoming once again with the Venezuelan situation, but then again, Venezuela is to the north, and between Venezuela and the most populated part of Brazil, there is the whole Amazon forest. So it's hard for Venezuelans to get to where people actually are in Brazil.
So in that case, do you not have a very big refugee problem in terms of Venezuelans?
We do at the north, at the state of Roraima, which is bordering with Venezuela, but they can't reach the richest part of Brazil. It's a long way down.
Oh, see, in America, they just walk right into Southern California.
But California is a very rich and populated state.
Well, exactly. Here they're able to just wander right into the gold mine.
Yeah, and how is it in Texas? I'm not sure.
Well, a lot of the border is just empty desert, but in southern Texas, there's urban buildup and areas, and they already completely own those areas of the country.
Yeah, well, the other thing about Texas is Texas has two things going for it. One is it has obviously a much longer border than California, but weirdly, it has a less built up border than California. So in other words, California has more border population centers. Texas has a couple of major population centers on their border, but what they do, what the U.S. Border Patrol does, is they just aggressively enforce those borders that are right on the population centers. And then you have these really, really long stretches of the Texas border, of the Texas-Mexico border, where there's basically no enforcement, but Mother Nature is sort of the like fill-in Border Patrol agent. She's like the, she's like the honorary Border Patrol agent because
They still get through anyway.
well, they do, but literally thousands of them die. I think it's in the high hundreds per annum. It might be in the thousands per annum. There's huge amounts of migrant death in these sort of unpatrolled deserts on the Texas-Mexico border because you could wander around in there for days. People get sunstroke and they go in circles. It's hard to quantify the number of deaths because the vultures consume bodies so quickly. So unless somebody is like from back home says, "Hey, this person's missing," or like the Border Patrol happens to find their body really, really quickly after they die, people can die there and just almost nothing of them is left in a matter of days. So
I like how Mother Nature's a better Border Patrol agent.
So Trump has increased vulture jobs during his administration.
Right.
Okay, that's a bad joke. Sorry.
Oh, no, it's funny.
The other problem that California has versus Texas is that once you get to California, it's way easier to exploit the like sort of state, the welfare state, the Californian welfare state, than it is to exploit whatever welfare provisions exist in Texas. I used to live in Texas, and in my experience, the Hispanic population there was very healthy. Most of the Hispanics that I knew, had jobs and like stable nuclear families.
And they're still on the wrong side of the border.
Jobs that you weren't willing to do, Ted?
That's right. Jobs that I wasn't willing to do. I also used to live in California, and in California, the situation is very, very different. The Hispanic population in California is a very unsavory element. That is not the case in Texas. It is absolutely the case in California. So it's sort of like we've got these two different petri dishes, and we're subjecting these different, like we're subjecting this organism to like very different environments to see how it will behave.
Well, they've still turned Texas purple. Texas will be a blue state in 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not advocating for the Hispanification of the United States. I'm just giving you the differences as I perceived them from living in both of those places.
James said what I think is the most important. What kind of values these immigrants are taking to the U.S. actually? If they're taking good values, why not accept them? But if they are bringing populist mindset to the U.S., it's not good. They're going to vote for Democrats, for instance.
So, this is and I think Rapture will likely agree with me on this. I don't know so much about Ted, but, quite frankly, I don't live in the U.S. anymore, but I did for a decade, slightly more than a decade. And the values they bring, sure, everyone loves a nice family man and a lovely wife who cooks dinner and raises the children. Well, who doesn't want that life set outside of the commies? I still don't want these people in the country. It's not their country. I look at America the same way that I look at my country, the same way that I look at Sweden. It doesn't matter if you're the most wholesome, kind-hearted, wonderful person in the world. I don't want 200,000 of you in Sweden. I don't want 12 million of you in America.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of on the same page. Demographics are important to me. I would like to bequeath to my posterity a society that looks substantially like the one that I was born into. if there are going to be differences, I want them to be like obvious improvements, not even ambiguous.
You want them to be legal.
That's right. That's right.
The boomer has come out. The boomerisms. They have to be legal. Legal. It's all about legal.
Legally.
But
I mean, so even if the difference is, I'm just sort of, I think I'm like, I've got that. There's a Scottish expression, supposedly. I don't know if this is really a Scottish expression. Maybe we should ask Millennial Woes sometimes if this is true. But supposedly, I've heard that there's a Scottish expression that when it is not necessary to change, it is necessary not to change. And I sort of have that attitude too. Like, there's no reason to change the racial composition of this country. So many good arguments can be made for why it would be really disastrous to change it. So I don't want to see it change just on that basis alone, even if you can make, a good claim that, like, look, these people are very healthy and normal and they're very much like you. I'm still very, very reticent about that.
Well, see, they get enough of them here that they say that because there are already so many here, there is a need for change. So they kind of complete their own line of thought in that regard. But to bring it back to Brazil, if you don't mind, it does seem like our countries have very different sets of problems in this regard, and that perhaps the Amazon rainforest is keeping the east coast of Brazil from large...
Can we lease the Amazon?
Yeah.
Can we lease the Amazon? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't know.
Felipe, can I ask, is you said that you were a Catholic, and my kudos to you for that. I think you know that I'm a Catholic too. Is Bolsonaro a practicing Catholic?
Not really. He's, I would say he's more into the Protestant side.
Oh, seriously? That's a shame. That's too bad. All right, well then I learned one thing about him that diminished my opinion of him tonight, but mostly it's positive. I still have a very positive outlook on him.
What is it exactly?
Well, I'm not a Protestant, but what's wrong with a Protestant? The Protestant work ethic built America.
Protestantism is that's totally wrong. The English work ethic and the Germanic work ethic, I would say Germanic generally, that Germanic work ethic built America. It had nothing to do with being Protestant. You could take those same people from, 500 years earlier when they were all Catholic and see what kind of work ethic they have, and you would find that it was comparable. It was the fact that this country was built by Germanic peoples, not the fact that they happened to have subscribed to a disastrous heresy perpetrated by Martin Luther or King
I don't
Henry VIII.
know. I don't know about that. North Germany did a lot better than South Germany, and South Germany was Catholic, and the UK did a lot better when it became Protestant. I really don't have an investiture in this. I'm just being a contrarian, to be quite honest. But
we should have a whole other show where we debate Catholic versus Protestant. Maybe we could convince Nick Fuentes to come on. I know he's big on that topic.
I mean, we can debate it,
well,
but I'm not even a Christian, so
you guys are going to have to contact him because he has me blocked on Twitter.
He does. That's funny.
I guess he's thin-skinned.
Ted will have to ask him because he doesn't like me either. So Ted will have to ask.
Well, if you would like to talk about Catholicism, I go to traditional Latin Mass. Old school, so to say.
Hey, so we don't even need Fuentes. Who needs Fuentes when you've got Felipe? That's what I say. I don't even need him. I just need Felipe on my team, and we will win this. Felipe, we've gone late into this show, but would you come back for another show if we did a Catholic versus Protestant debate?
Oh, sure thing, but
we're going to have to make it Catholicism versus the world because I'm not up to date on Protestantism.
That's the thing, yeah.
Listen to Felipe is trying to he's trying to grasp any straw he can to get out of this. Yeah. Here's my escape clause.
It's a good because I converted in 2017. A little more
Really?
about me. Yeah.
What did you practice? Did you have any religious beliefs prior to that, or?
I went through so many things. So many things. This could be I don't know, a topic to this show if you ever are going to do it.
Yeah, the
But
spiritual journey of Felipe. That could be a good show. That's
I think
no, not about me, but about religion in general.
I think religions in general would be interesting. You know, Ted has always been a Catholic. Felipe's gone through what he admits has been a couple spiritual journeys. Rapture's not religious. I'm not religious, but I've gone through. I was raised as a Catholic, and I study Norse paganism. But I'm a member of the Church of Sweden, which is a Protestant church. So I think it'd be a very interesting show.
Yeah, I think it would be fun. Felipe, would you come back for a show like that?
I would. Surely.
Well, I
face.
say that we wind it down and we can talk about the specifics after the show, so we don't bore our audience.
I don't think there's anything boring about the inside baseball of an exciting upcoming program. However, I do think this. I would say, how long has this show gone?
Almost 2 hours.
Almost 2 hours. Yeah. I think we've pushed our poor guest to his limit. I think we need to let him go just because, he's a hardworking government man. And you know what? It's too bad because I wanted to ask you a little bit about how your work, about just your work in the government and what you were doing. But yeah, let's just do this. Could we get a promise from you to come back and appear again? I think this has been an excellent show. And I'm sure that the audience has enjoyed it. I don't know. Actually, this show's been a little different because normally I watch the chat like religiously to see what people are saying, but this time I was so engrossed in what you were telling us that I didn't even pay attention to the chat. But what do you say, Felipe? Would you come back sometime? And you can also give us updates on the situation in Brazil.
Sure. Yes, I can do both. If you want, I can say a little bit about my work.
Yeah, sure. I'd love that.
So I worked for 9 years at one ministry. It was related to water supply, sanitation, and waste management infrastructure. And now, at the new government, in this new government, I work in the team for privatization and liquidation of state companies, because only the federal government has 134 state companies.
So is Bolsonaro trying to really shrink the size of the federal government?
Exactly. Lower taxes, less state intervention in the economy, less state companies, and less bureaucracy to open business.
Sounds like
and less fights. Small government, in short. I'm part of the team.
The Trump that we should have had. I'm so jealous.
Trump has done so many great things for our country.
Oh, come on. I'm going to quote Patrick Casey here on a tweet. Civilization is burning in the background, but at least the economy is doing well.
He's done so many great things for us that other presidents, I can't even imagine any of the previous presidents of my lifetime, except maybe Reagan, doing the things for us that Trump has done. And this is just the grass is always greener on the other side.
Yeah, I mean, he's even getting a settlement named after him in the Golan Heights. So.
Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh!
Yeah, hey, wow. he let Israel have the Golan Heights. He's done so much for the state of Israel, more than Reagan ever did.
I can't believe how ungrateful you guys are, or how poor your perspective is on this presidency.
Well, am I supposed to be happy about the small garden trellis that he's putting up on the border? He didn't lock Hillary up. I mean, this could be a whole episode. We could do an episode on Trump grievances.
It can and should.
Well, it would be like a zombie apocalypse if Hillary won. So, I mean, I guess I can't complain.
What I would watch from you guys is commenting his tweets.
His tweets are good. They're funny.
Yeah. I think he's got a great tweet game. So what are you saying, Felipe? We should do a show of just like the best Trump tweets, a highlight reel.
Oh, I would watch that for sure. There is one in particular that I would like to know what you would say.
Okay, what is that?
It's one that he says in capital letters, presidential harassment.
That's it. That's the whole tweet.
Is it referring to when the media bugs him?
Yes, it is.
Well, the one good thing about Donald Trump, one of the good things, I shouldn't make it seem like there's only one. There are some good things about the man, is that he really does PO the media establishment.
Hey, so you don't have boomers over there in Brazil, right?
Bloomberg.
Boomers.
Boomers, the
it's kind of an
post-war
American
baby boomer generation.
They have shitty politics, and they're a big voting bloc, and they suck. You probably don't have.
You better watch it. You're going to make angry one of our biggest fans who hates boomer hate.
Who is that?
Well, I don't know if we can say him on air, but you know him in the chat by the prefix GE.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Gaspar Elmwood, yeah.
Yes, he hates boomer hate. He thinks it's terrible when in fact it's totally warranted because they just ruin the world.
Well, it dawned on me that, here we are talking to a guy in Brazil, and he probably has no reference to this thing we have to endure over here, which are the baby boomers. Basically.
Well, let's ask. So, Felipe, was there a post-war baby boom in Brazil like there was in the United States after World War II?
Yeah, we had a large population increase from the 70s until the mid-90s. We went from less than 100 million to nearly 200 million. Now we're 210 million.
Wow, okay.
So these are people who would be kind of like late teens and in their 20s during the 1960s. And so they think they're right about everything. And they still dominate politics.
Yeah, something like
everything
that.
would be fine if we were just like them.
Just like boomers.
That's the classic baby boomer argument in the U.S. for these people born in like the 60s or who were youngins in the 60s, I should say. Their argument is it doesn't matter what color or religion or creed or anything. It doesn't matter what you are, as long as you say the Pledge of Allegiance and you act just like they acted, and then everything is fine. They're basically a whole generation that we've memed.
They're funny characters. I think it would be fun to do a show where we get some of them on, reach out to some of these boomers.
Let's get Wild Bill on.
Yeah, I would love that.
We'd have to spend 3 hours getting them hooked up to the chat.
Yeah. So we need to start the show a few hours early. Okay.
Yeah. You're right. We'd have to budget the time to teach them how to stream. But I would really enjoy just sort of dissecting the worldview of one of these people because they're very interesting people. And I do not hate them. I think that, I do think that they're kind of.
I don't hate them either, but they are funny.
Yeah.
And it's funny to hate them.
It does sort of amaze me that they can be so old and yet so childish. She's like so not childish, but childlike in their naivete. But I would love to spend some time. We should do a show where we bring in a boomer correspondent and just try to figure out the way that they see the world.
Yeah, they're just totally bizarre. They have this unique outlook on the world, and it's like in Technicolor or something, and we can't understand it at all. It's like they just crawled out of a time capsule from the like early 70s or something.
Okay, lads, I think we should call it because I'm starting to turn into a pumpkin. Felipe, thank you so much for joining the program tonight.
It was a real pleasure to be here. Thank you guys for listening.
And thank you for coming.
What I had to say. I hope I answered at least the most important questions.
Oh, you did it! You did a great job. Thanks for joining us. It was fun talking.
Yeah, and in terms of like the questions that you answered, buddy, you were this was fascinating to me. This is one of our more interesting episodes, so don't worry about that.
And I'll be watching the other episodes. Actually, you mentioned, I think it was the first one, right? And you were speaking about countries that could be aligned to the Trump administration.
Yes, that was our first episode. It was called Geopolitical Roundabout. I think that was our first episode, right, guys?
Yeah, I think it was too. We need to do an update of that one.
Yeah, we could do a part 2 at some point. But yeah, sure, check out our back catalog. If you do, I promise you'll never come on again. But at least it'll up our view count marginally. So
No, it was really fun.
okay, and everybody in chat, thank you for tuning in. Any last words, guys, before we sign off?
No.
Nope, I'm about done. Just gonna go and check on the little girl, and then probably head to bed. So,
all right, everybody. Good night and God bless.
Good
Bye-bye.
night. Bless.
Stop broadcast right there.